Okay, everyone, we are joined by a very special, I would say exceptional guest. Doron Kempel is an Israeli born American entrepreneur and, more impressively, former deputy chief of, and I hope I get this right, Sayeret Matkal, which, if you don't know, is the elite special forces unit of the IDF. And he has an extensive experience there fighting, serving in the IDF from 81 to 94 and leading covert missions, decorated with the Chief of Staff decoration by Ehud Barak, played a key role in planning an operation to target Saddam Hussein. The mission was aborted. Since then, he has had a remarkable business career with several technology companies, which he's created. And we met about a month or two ago, where Doron was showing me his latest business venture called Bond, which is so cool. It's basically AI-powered personal security services to give people 24/7 support. I'd never seen anything like it. Doron, when you spoke at this conference that we both went to, and you were talking about your insights into Israel's situation, the geopolitical situation at large. It was before the American election, and I was like, I've got to get you onto JTV to give us your insights. You have obviously a unique experience to give us some insight into what's happening. So let's just jump into things. I want to talk about what's happened in Amsterdam, but before that, the main reason I wanted to speak to you is you're based in America. You were talking a lot about US-Israel relations. What are your main sort of headline points about what now shifts in the aftermath of the US election?
What shifts from whose perspective? Let's assume that there are three interesting perspectives: Iran's perspective, Israel's perspective, US perspective. Of course, there are other perspectives, but I think that these are the three main players in the drama that we're looking at. And let me suggest two things. First of all, everything that I say on this show is my opinion. I'm not in dialogue with my friends in Israel, so these are just opinions and conjectures. They're not informed by anything that anybody is planning, point number one. Point number two, very importantly for everybody who's listening, strategy requires empathy to everybody who's playing the game and objectivity. Once you get too caught up in your emotions, what you want to have happen, and you can't see things, that's the empathy part, through the shoes of the other party, you're going to make severe errors. So now, having said that, let's get back to your question. What has shifted? First of all, the US is a major player. Anything that Israel or Iran are considering is influenced by what the US is going to do. The US no longer is as worried about oil price and about various votes of various segments of the US population as it was a week ago, which means that the game is now open. And now we need to ask ourselves, what are the interests of the parties and what we think is going to unfold? In my mind, let's look at it from Israel's perspective. Again, let's think about it strategically. It doesn't matter if we're Israelis or Iranian or anybody else who's looking at this. Israel's assumptions should be, my humble opinion, that if Iran is not neutralized, let's use civil terminology, then there is no livable Israel in 10 years. Now, when I say 10 years, it doesn't need to be 10, it could be 3, it could be 4. But basically, if Iran is allowed, from Israel's perspective, to continue operating the way that it has, via its proxies, and soon we'll have nuclear power, that means that nobody reasonable will want to live in Israel. That means end. If you make that as a working assumption, that means, from Israel's perspective, which Iran and the US should consider, that Israel needs to neutralize that risk. Now, there are various scenarios in terms of how that happens, and one key element is whether Israel needs the US's help and or the US's approval, or neither. If they need the US's help or the US's approval, then we've just switched from one phase in which this episode, this war, cannot end, to a new reality whereby we should expect it to end soon. either because the US says, go do what you have to do, or the US provides whatever level of assistance that it needs to provide. So to your question, we are at a completely new ball game right now, and I'm not even getting into the question of who's in power in the United States, which of course is also meaningful, but I'm not clever enough or knowledge enough to know what the Democrats really want to have happen. What we know is what the Democrats said leading to the elections. So I'm going to basically avoid that particular question of Republicans, Democrats. I'm just going to say the US is a significant player. Israel's dependence on the United States per us, the audience, me, is unknown. It could be that they need help at some levels or just approval or none, but we're now at a different phase of the game. I can continue to elaborate, but I think I answered your narrow question of what has changed. What has changed is that the game is now open.
That's really, really interesting. And so for me, the question becomes, well, you say the game is now open. What would be an ideal scenario for how Iran is dealt with? I know that there's been a statement from the Trump administration saying they're not looking for regime change in Iran, but of course they did a lot to weaken Iran in the prior Trump administration. What would be an ideal outcome for Israel?
Okay, so first of all, let's be clever members of the audience. Everything that everybody says when there's war should be thought of as misdirection. So if the US has not said one thing about what needs to happen to Iran, does that mean that they don't care? I'll leave that question open.
Yeah.
So let's look at it now from the perspective of Israel. Israel needs to neutralize Iran. What does it mean to neutralize Iran? There are a few scenarios. The scenarios that everybody describes in terms of using air power, etc., seem, let's call it, not elegant and too severe. If what you want to do is actually change the regime, which is the most delicate operation where the least number of people get hurt, and where you maintain a relationship with the Iranian people, which I think is a critical assumption. There's nothing wrong with the Iranian people, just like there's never anything wrong with people. It's all about the leaders. There are no bad enemies, etc. It's the leaders who make all the decisions. I think that the legitimacy is there to make a very precise operation and to conduct a regime change. I won't elaborate beyond that. But to me, all the dialogue about Air Force and attacking this and attacking that, misdirection. That's not how I would do it. Point number one. When somebody says, I don't want regime change, means nothing. What people say about what they want means nothing. It's all misdirection. This is part of the game. That's the perspective of Israel. Now, I'm a guest on your show. I try to present everything very objectively. The question of where I was born and what I want to have happen is not relevant on this show. Let's look at it from Iran's perspective. From Iran's perspective, what is very clear to the leaders is that they have no serious military that fits the requirements of the 21st century, right? The last 3 years have been eye-opening, clearly for me. I didn't see, I guess like many others, what is going on between Russia and Ukraine, which, by the way, is part of the opportunity. If you had to develop the script whereby Israel neutralizes Iran, you would need Russia to be very busy. Russia is very busy. This script could not have been written any better. And you had to wait for the elections. And you had to manage the whole campaign in Gaza, shifting to Lebanon, Hezbollah. And now that Hezbollah is neutralized, I'm not saying that they're out, I'm just saying that they're not practically a player right now. Now is the time to take care of Iran at the end of the elections. So if you were the chess player that sets the strategy for Israel, you had to maintain this campaign alive. There cannot be any deal with Hamas. This campaign needs to be alive until the opportunity to neutralize Iran, which is once in a lifetime or once in a century opportunity, is realized. If this campaign, from the perspective of Israel, ends without neutralizing Iran, we've done very little. That's the perspective of Israel. From the perspective of Iran, it is now clear that the military that they have is not competent. We keep on talking about how many missiles they have. How effective have their missiles been? Do they have an air force? Do they have any forces that can cross the desert from Iran to Israel? No, they have nothing. They don't even have carriers for their tanks. Is there any way that their tanks make it all the way to Israel without being destroyed in the Arabian desert? In other words, they're not relevant, they're exposed. So if I'm Iran, and what I want as Iran, let's assume that I'm a leader of Iran, and what I want is to survive, clearly, especially that particular regime, then I look at my chips and I negotiate the best possible deal with the US and Israel while maintaining my pride, of course, that ensures that I'm not neutralized. Because if you look at what has happened the last 3 months, what does that tell you? It tells you that you have no real military. You cannot hurt Israel. Israel can hit you wherever it wants, right? We have seen that Iran is not too far. And even within Iran, Israel can select very precise targets. And apparently the Mossad and maybe the CIA feel at home in Iran and in Tehran. So if you look at it objectively, again, let's be objective and dispassionate about it. In order to survive, you need to strike a deal. So in my humble opinion, of course, I'm referring to all of this with theatrical terms like it's a game or it's a chess game. It's not. This is very serious. People are dying, fortunes of individuals and countries. And I think that, by the way, that critical point in the world, Iran-Israel, is just the touch point of the overall separation of the large groups. So it's the West on one end, Russia and China the other. That makes Iran a very important player in that much bigger game. Because what is Iran's role from the perspective of Russia and China? Iran is this pit bull that can bite the ankles of the West. So even from the perspective of the West, irrespectively of what leaders say, because leaders needs the votes of people who happen to be Muslim, your friends, my friend, or Muslims. They need their votes. So they're going to speak in a certain way, but the West needs Iran neutralized. So what they say or what they don't say means nothing. This is, again, a once-in-a-century opportunity. And I think that in the next few months, I can't put my finger on it, either there's going to be a historical accord or agreement that neutralizes the nuclear program of Iran, or Iran will cease to operate under this particular regime. If that doesn't happen, it's a strategic failure for Israel. It's a lost opportunity for Israel and for the West, my humble perspective.
Wow. Wow, there's a lot in there to unpack. And the big question that I have, you said Iran's primary interest is surviving. So I remember studying when I was in school how in the final year and last months of the Nazi regime, Hitler made some stupid tactical errors, not least using his trains, rather than sending troops to the Eastern Front, to get more Jews from Hungary to Auschwitz and to the camps. So my question is Iran's primary concern here survival, or is it actually killing Jews and killing off Israel, God forbid? Because are you certain that that is the case? Because if not, maybe, I mean, they've shown a lot of desperation recently. Maybe they'll continue to make that their primary concern.
So I'm not certain of anything. I'm just offering a perspective here, and I'm not close enough to the intel reports in order to make a certain or even a high probability judgment. But my assumption from my experience is the leaders always want to survive, or whatever they view themselves as needs to survive. Sometimes they commit suicide, as you're referring to World War II, and there were some suicides at the end. But my belief is that in these regimes, the leaders want to survive. And once they have a good, clear picture of what is really going on, I think that they're going to take those steps.
Right. That makes sense. And Hamas and Hezbollah, can you talk to us a bit about where we're at there? I'm curious, particularly from your prior IDF and security perspective, on what you made of the attack, the Pages attack and the ingenuity there of going after Hezbollah in particular. I think all of us were completely blindsided by that. What do you make of where we're up to right now?
Right. So we all as humans have this psychological cognitive flaw of hindsight. After something happens, we can't think about ourselves in the past, thinking about any other scenario other than the one that has actually occurred. But if I try to be intellectually honest with myself, I think that everything that happened in Gaza is, I would call it very sad, but expected. So the terrain is flat. There are a lot of tunnels. I assume that it's going to take time. And my assumption was that there's no rush because the end game is Iran. It's not Hamas. So I think that everything that happened in Gaza is something that I anticipated. What happened in Lebanon is not something that I anticipated. And I think that the way that Israel handled the Hezbollah, in particular with the pager attack, and then the level of precision intelligence that they had in order to methodically get eventually to Nasrallah, that was, now that we're thinking about it after the fact, that seems to have been easier than anybody expected. So that pretty much was a game changer. My concern was that there's no way to Iran without going through Hezbollah because you need to neutralize them. Otherwise, you have your back to Lebanon and you're working with Iran. You need to take care of that particular target. So that was a strategic blow. Now, I remember speaking with somebody who was very senior in the Israeli administration, and he asked me whether I think whether that was a tactical or a strategic move. In other words, the pager attack was it tactical or strategic? I think it was strategic on two levels. Number one, think about the deterrence that created in the world. If you're any decision maker anywhere in the world, if you're anybody that knows anything about special operations, and by the way, there are two levels of special operations. There are special operations that are overt. In other words, they're confidential up until the moment where you open fire. And then there are missions that are covert. They include undercover. This is a different story. But anybody who understands covert operations understand that this is a way to achieve strategic goals via tactical special operations means. Because that created two things. Number one, tremendous deterrence, because now everybody feels exposed. Of course, that happens in tangent with the fact that the leader of Hamas, the political leader of Hamas, was eliminated in Tehran. We almost forgot that. That in itself is a big deal. In Tehran, what does that mean?
Huge.
That somebody has the ability to gather information, establish infrastructure. Let's stop talking about it here. And then at the same time, there was the pager attack. And after that, Nasrallah was eliminated. So I think that has strategic implications on everybody, because even if you want to get into a deal with Iran, that must influence the Iranian decision makers. Even if in those regimes you don't get clear intel because people want to please you, they don't want you to get upset if you're the leader, you see it on television. Everything is exposed. It must rattle you. That is strategic. Secondly, Israel was able to finish off, or let's say neutralize Hezbollah. I'm not saying that this ends before the Hezbollah is behind the Litani River and other arrangements are established. This is a long campaign. But at this particular point in time, just my estimation, Israel can now turn fully east and focus on Iran. So that is strategic. And the timing is also very important. All of this, if you had to write the script for it, if you were a director, then think about what is required in order to neutralize Iran. First of all, October 7 needs to happen. Terrible as October 7 is, if October 7 doesn't happen, Israel does not go to war. Israel is too comfortable pre-October 7th. It's too split. I'm not getting into the politics of it. All of it is just objective. There's no way to mobilize Israel into war and being willing to accept the casualties that Israel has accepted. So in your script, which of course I did not write, I don't know if anybody wrote it, and by anybody you can take that to higher transcendental levels, of course. First of all, 10-7 needs to happen. Israel needs to rattle to the core and decide that they now need to take radical action. Without that decision, and perhaps without Netanyahu, nonconformist Netanyahu, as the leader, this doesn't happen. So let's take a step back. Russia needs to be busy with Ukraine. 10-7 needs to happen in the way that it has happened. The Prime Minister of Israel needs to be somebody who's willing to be nonconformist and deal with the fact that he's not being liked. This is not a simple point. Not all leaders are that way. Most leaders, they want to be liked. Otherwise, why do they want to be leaders? But this particular leader, just think of what he had to endure in the last decade. So he was ready for this nonconformist move. And then the plan had to be to drag this campaign up until the US elections. Cannot end earlier. Think about all the pressure to end it earlier. No, you don't end it before you end it in Iran. Just one person's perspective that disseminates from my original assumption, and that is Israel is not livable in 10 years or earlier with the current state of affairs in the Middle East. And everybody around the world, mainly the West, is a cheerleader but can't say it on public television because they're all democracies, they need the votes. So they want Israel to do everything that I'm now describing, and it is now getting to its crescendo. So that's the way that I view it.
Wow. That is really fascinating, Doron. I want to talk a bit also about within Israel and the whole issue of, the two-state solution, one-state solution, all these things. There's been some reports that Trump is planning on reviving his peace plan, and I want to get up the map here for you from what was the peace plan that was proposed, which talks about creating some kind of demilitarized Palestinian state. I wanted to get your thoughts on this because to me it seems, especially in the aftermath of October 7th, that any Arab autonomy is just unthinkable anymore. Because of what happened when we left Gaza. And so I wondered what your thoughts were on the idea of reviving this plan and just purely from a security perspective.
So let's think 50 years out and then count backwards. The new Middle East that there is an opportunity to now create, again, maybe it's once in a century, maybe more, is a Middle East that Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, the rest of the world wants to see. The rest of the world, maybe not China, maybe not Russia, I won't get into their shoes yet. But it's an environment where people basically transition to a more normalized state of mind. Think about the relationship between Israel and the Emirates. It's a very normalized relationship. If that's what everybody wants, then the question is, how do we get there? And when we get there, it doesn't really matter where the border is. No more than it matters where's the border between New York and New Jersey. It's not a strategic issue. Of course, New Jersey and New York will have views about it, but these are economical questions. Now, clearly, there are a lot of people who have religious beliefs on all related sides, and that needs to be dealt with. But 50 years from now, and I'm not that pessimistic, I think it's going to occur much earlier than that. So once Iran is eliminated, it's no longer the pit bull that serves China and Russia. And now there is an opening to create normalized relationships with Saudi Arabia and with Iran and with Turkey. Everybody can relax and stop the militant rhetoric that allows even Erdogan to stay in power. All of these are just talks. At the end of the day, all these people want to continue ruling, and there is a way to get there. Now, getting there needs to be through security arrangements and through a long process where everybody in Gaza, or most of the people in Gaza and in Lebanon, want what is normal for all of us. For kids to prosper, to be safe, to be poets, to be farmers, to be engineers, to be lawyers, etc. At the end of the day, we need to help even the people in Gaza to shift to that particular mindset. It's not going to take a year. So this is going to take a long process of normalization of leadership, of inspections, and let's not expect it to be perfect. Perfect is not on the menu, as they say. But I think that there is a path, and somebody needs to sit down and understand where do the boundaries pass and who funds all of that and how it's managed more correctly this time, because we have seen that it hasn't worked. When Israel pulled out of Lebanon, which was a historic move by Barak, Israel was stuck in Lebanon for about 18 years, and then Barak took it out. Same thing with Sharon, left Gaza. These are monumental steps. It wasn't managed properly. I'm not criticizing. I'm not saying that I would have done anything differently, but we know now more than we did then. And Israel and everybody who negotiates needs to make sure that there are proper security arrangements, because I think that there is a bright future ahead of the Middle East.
Great. Well, that's good to hear. And you, by the way, you mentioned Turkey. There's been a lot of questions around, to what extent are they, do they pose a security threat to Israel? What are your thoughts on Turkey? We've seen Erdogan hosting Hamas terror leaders. How concerned is Israel, or should they be, about Turkey?
Well, we should not, as people, we should not underestimate everybody. But there's no serious military in the Middle East other than Israel. So nobody wants a war with Turkey, and Turkey doesn't want war. There's just a lot of talking in order to set up the population for the next elections. That's what I read out of it. When you are in Turkey, and I was in Turkey a few months ago, and when I speak with my Turkish friends and business counterparts, everything is very normal. Everybody behaves at that particular level of the discourse as if this is just talk and it's going to relax. So I'm not taking anything for granted, but I don't think Turkey is a threat. Nobody in the Middle East is a threat right now. The only superpower in the Middle East is Israel. And you've got to ask yourself whether any of the other militaries in the area that are not battle tested are a serious threat to anybody. So what we've seen with Russia is shocking. How is it that Russia doesn't have air superiority over Ukraine?
Right. It's a great question. That was going to be my question.
And how is it, if you complete that sentence, how is it that Israel can fly above Iran that is protected with what? Protected with Russian air defense systems? So this should be very troubling to everybody in the region who is not battle proven.
Is there any military of equal size and power to Israel that poses a significant threat to Israel? I'm talking about military.
Not in that zone. Well, Russia is, just because of their size. But I don't see a scenario. Of course, we can think about crazy scenarios, but Russia is a serious entity. But in nature, animals don't mess with other animals because they don't want to get hurt. It's not a question of who wins at the end. It's a question of what price you're willing to pay. Yeah. And I don't think that there's any animal in that particular zoo, in the Middle East zoo, that would want to mess with Israel right now. I'm not speaking out of ego. I'm just speaking about the fact that so much of Israel's resources, intellectual, spiritual, technological, financial, aided, of course, by the United States, so much of it still is invested in defense. Still, you have excellent people who prefer not to be lawyers, not to be entrepreneurs, but to be part of the defense apparatus. That's a difficult decision. And therefore, I don't think anybody would want that war. And I think everybody is just talking. The only entities that had the fortitude to do it are Iran. But Iran didn't want to deal with Israel directly. They used Hamas and they used the Shiite in the north, Hezbollah, to do it. But Iran itself probably doesn't want a direct confrontation with Israel.
Yeah. Fascinating, really fascinating. Doron, it's been so insightful. The last thing I wanted to ask before I let you go is about what happened in Amsterdam. There's been some reports that the basically kind of pogrom attack is targeting and hunting down Israelis and Jews. There's been some reports that this was actually premeditated. It wasn't some kind of spontaneous moment. I can't really think of many incidents where something like this on this level has occurred in Europe since the 1940s. I wondered what your reflections were on what's taken place now. Have you have any particular insight or information?
Right. So I'm not familiar with the details. I learned about it this morning, so I can't really comment on the details. But let's take a step back and ask ourselves what's possible and what is likely to happen. Clearly, there's a large part of the population of the democracies in Europe, and to some extent, the democracy here in the United States, that don't love Israel. I'm choosing my words lightly. Maybe they don't love Jews. By the way, I think that tactically it's correct for Jews everywhere to talk about anti-Semitism, but I think that there's a difference. If we're strategists, we need to see if the word anti-Semitism is the right term to understand all the types of threats, because there's anti-Israel and there's anti-Jews. I think these are separate matters. But at the high level, of course, a lot of people are very upset with Israel. Let's be empathetic. If you and I have family members in Gaza, we're very upset right now. The word upset doesn't start to describe that right now. And if we're at certain age and certain temperament, we will want to take some action.
Or
And
if
then
you're
the
just
question
consuming the
is,
media, you just see what the media are telling you and you think this is terrible.
yes, and by the way, it is terrible. It is, everything that is
Of
happening is
course.
terrible.
Yeah, but the
Nobody wants
context is missing.
civilians to be hurt. But look, we also don't want to go to the dentist. But we
Right.
understand as adults that we need to go to the dentist. We need to do certain things that are painful. Israel doesn't want any civilians to be hurt. I led hostage rescue situations. These are not clean operations. Your people die, hostages die, and other people die. So this is military affairs outside of Hollywood. That's the reality. Now, there are a lot of people who are very upset, and we can understand that. Again, we need to be empathetic and objective when we think strategically. Now they're upset and say that they live in Amsterdam, haven't looked at the details, and they know that there is an Israeli delegation or there is a game against Ajax, and that Jewish people are going to be there, and they may see that as an opportunity. What that means to all the Jewish communities anywhere in the world is that they need to be on heightened alert. Let me connect that to what you said earlier, which is the company that I lead, Bond. Security in the private sector up until now has been zone defense in sports jargon. People protect the buildings. But when you leave the buildings, you're not protected unless you're the chief executive officer or the president, right? When you leave the synagogue or you leave the JCC or the school, you're by yourself, walking to your car, walking home. And if somebody wants to harm you, they're not going to harm you inside the protected building. They're going to wait until you leave. Up until now, there has not been any solution that's effective, affordable, and preserves privacy to enhance the personal security and peace of mind of people when they leave the buildings. Bond is that solution. So if you have responsibility, you're a member of the Jewish community or any community, you have to do your job and look at this particular solution because it changes the game. It allows people to be more secure. There is no such thing as completely secure, more secure. So if you're a member of a Jewish community and you're responsible for security, open your eyes and think about how you protect your people outside of the buildings, because these people were hurt outside of the buildings, where you probably assume it's not your responsibility. Every Jew is your responsibility if you're responsible for security. Find the right solutions.
Absolutely. And can you just tell us where we can find more information about Bond and your, what the work you're doing in this security company?
Sure. So in general, if you're responsible for security, make sure that you're briefed about what we do. Our customers include some of the largest corporations of the world that are giving the service to all their employees, not just to the executive. They include cities. We're now running pilots with cities in France, cities in Israel, cities in the United States. Everybody can be more secure at an affordable level. Look us up on our website, our bond with you, with the authorities, with the community. Our bond, together we can make everybody more secure. ourbond.com.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your innovation. And truly, Doron, given your service to Israel and the Jewish people, I genuinely feel honored to talk to you, to have your contribution to JTV. and just really, really grateful for your time. And if you'd be up for it, we'd love to invite you back on, because I have no doubt that we're going to get a lot of positive responses from our viewers when we put this up.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. It's a pleasure to see you again. I'm at your service.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. If you've made it so far in this video, I have a request for you. JTV has been having a really big impact in spreading the truth about Israel and creating positive associations with the Jewish people, Judaism, and Israel. We've really grown a lot, particularly in the last year, and we're having a really significant impact, both for Jews and non-Jews. But I really want to take JTV to the next level so we can start to compete with the other big online media beasts that are often peddling anti-Israel content. And the way we're going to do that is to scale even faster. So I'd love to build a team where we have other presenters doing shows like me. Let's start doing documentaries, supplementary content, animated content, etc., etc. And to do that, I'd like to build a bit of a team. So what we're going to do is we're going to do one fundraising day, just one, where we try and build up some funding in order to fund such a team. Now, to do that, it's going to obviously require people to get involved. And I'm wondering if you would consider, if you're watching JTV content and appreciate what we do and want to help partner with us in taking this to the next level and spreading the truth farther and wider than ever before, I wonder if you'd consider partnering with us simply by running a mini page on the fundraiser that we do, where you just reach out to your contacts on that day that we choose to fundraise and see if they'll all chip in. If you'd be up for doing that, of which I would be so grateful, then please click on the Google form link in the video description of this video, where you can simply just put in a few contact details. It'll be a very small commitment, as I say, literally just one day that we'll all agree upon as a collective community. But the impact is going to be so big. There's such strength in numbers. If we all pull together and do this, we can take this to the next level. And as I say, all of us can partner together in bringing and spreading the truth to the whole world. So please do consider clicking on that link, filling in the form, and I'll be in touch very soon to talk about the next steps. Small commitment, but a big impact. Hi, thank you so much for watching. To watch another one, click here. To stay up to date with all our content, click here to subscribe. And if you're able to, you can help support JTV to grow and grow by clicking join below this video, where you can become a member and get perks including early access to videos and private live discussions with me. But most of all, you'll be partnering with us on our mission to change the world.